Hi, welcome to Chapter 18. Chapter 18 is more of a how do we clean our CSS up and make it more maintainable, meaning I might be the one who creates the CSS, so how do I make sure that someone who comes behind me is able to then maintain the CSS. So the very first thing this chapter talks about is adding comments. So for example, if we just have asterisk, box sizing, box border, we want to make sure we know what that, someone who's coming behind us, what does that mean to them? And it says, so you basically make a comment with a slash asterisk, that's the beginning of a comment, and then you put a asterisk slash at the end, and this can go multiple lines. So once you put, so anything between the slash asterisk and the asterisk slash is a comment, and it could be multiple lines. Here it says make width values including padding and borders. Okay, just a nice little comment there. Another thing too is make sure we, for example, here are some great comments. So here is a slash asterisk and asterisk slash everything, and here is a comment. And here's a nice comment, 1, 2, 2. So here's another comment box. So some really nice comments in here, but use names clearly, use classes clearly. This is, you already learned the technical aspect of naming different types of selectors. Class selectors begin with a period. To identify styles as a class and ID styles begin with a pound sign. In addition, names you give your ID classes. But beyond those requirements, following some rules of thumb can help you keep track of your styles and work more effectively. So one of the things you want to do is name your classes by purpose, not appearance. And we don't want to say pink, or we don't want to say red. We don't want to say those colors, because down the road we could change that color to something else, and now that name is basically no longer valid. So they're saying dot red highlight. Actually call it something else, dot error, dot alert. Don't use names based on position. Okay, so if you have something like left sidebar, this seems like an obvious choice. You want something on the left. But if all of a sudden you want something and before that, left really no longer is a valid name. So let's say we have left sidebar. All of a sudden we want to put in a nav bar off to the left over here. Now left sidebar really doesn't work. Maybe sidebar 1, main, and sidebar 2, however you want to do it. That way it's not tied to a specific name. Because if you change the position of that nav bar, now if you've got left in there and all of your code, it's going to be hard to make that change. You'd probably leave it left, but it doesn't seem right for somebody to come in behind you and see left and it's on the right now. And so again, avoid those types of things. Avoid cryptic names. I'm a programmer. Oh God, these are terrible. Somebody come up with an acronym of SAP2T. What in the heck does that mean? That means nothing to me. It meant something to the person who wrote it. It means nothing to me. I have no idea what that is. So S and S1 and S2, those are meaningless to someone who is basically updating this code. So again, make sure you use strong names. Oh, by the way, up here they say dot float left and dot float right. That's probably good names because you are making them float left and float right. Don't repeat yourself. Typing the same code over and over wastes your time and also adds extra code to your style sheets. So here we have button class add to a cart, button class delete, button class order. So here's what our code would look like. Dot add has border, font, color, and background. Delete has border, font, color, and background. Order has border, font, color, and background. Instead, let's create a button class, and then let's have or just use button for your button tag, and then basically change the specific item that needs to be changed for that specific item. So a button is going to have a border, a font, and a color. A dot add class is going to have a background color of orange. A delete class is going to have a background of red, and order. So really the only difference between the add and the delete is the background color and the order. So do that. Make sure you have the button set up so that it is has all the specifics, and then change the details of each of those background colors according to whatever class you're using to that. So only change what needs to be changed. Don't duplicate color or duplicate code. And again, that basically goes, that is preached all through programming. Use multiple classes to save time. You can take the don't repeat yourself motto even further by using multiple classes. So let's say you've got a class that does this specific thing, you've got another class that does this specific thing, and you want this item over here to have those two. So creating a new class with all of those, just use both those classes. So here's kind of a nice example. So here we have we've got an image of photo 1, and we're going to use the class image frame and float left. So we can actually incorporate both classes into one. So you might kind of go through and see where your code, you might have some similarities between different classes. If you do, take those similarities out, put them in one class, and leave those classes alone, and just include both classes. Use shorthand properties. Okay, so instead of doing padding top, right, bottom, left, just do in this case the padding top and bottom are 5, the right and left are 10. Just do padding 5, 10. Because remember, if you just have two, the first one is top and bottom, the next one is left, right. You can do padding. I'm very guilty of this. I will do padding 0 pixels, px. You don't need the pixels. You just say padding 0. That's it. Group styles that apply to related parts of the page. Group all rules that apply to text, graphic, and links in one place. So put all those in one place in your CSS. Put all of your image code in another. Maybe all of your button stuff in another. Your form tags in another, and that way there you have them kind of separated out, because it's you might put little comments to showing where all of those tags began and all those tags end. Again, and that's what I just talked about here, use comments to separate your styling groups. Here's your layout. Here's a nice way to do a layout. You got a nice border on top and bottom. Use multiple style sheets. Maybe you have a style sheet that basically is used for this particular item. Maybe you have another style sheet that's kind of used for these. We kind of talked about that with mobile devices. You might have a CSS just for mobile. You might have one just for desktop, one's for tablets. Keep those separated as separate CSSs. That way you can just incorporate all of those CSSs, and you can just utilize all the code you want. Within, let's say, and again, what's really nice, within one CSS, we can import other CSSs. So here I might have my base CSS, and it basically imports the main, layout, color, and forms. So I have these 4 tags within my CSS. Okay, really strong way to break out your CSS. That way there, if I have a main, I just need to use main CSS, I can, or layout, whatever the case may be. If I need them all together, I can then have a base CSS that brings them all together into one CSS. And that way there, all I need is this line right here, just this one link, and it brings in all the CSSs. And again, if you remember how to do that, we use the import URL and then the CSS name. So here it talks about eliminating browser style reference. It says when you view a web page that has been CSSified in a web browser, you can see the HTML tags already have some minimal formatting. Headings are bold, H1 is bigger than normal text, so on and so forth. It's a good idea to zero out. Now if you look at some of the CSX examples and most all the chapters more in the beginning of this class, we saw that they had a lot of, I call it a good starting point. They kind of cleared all the CSSs out to make sure everything was cleared out before we used our CSSs. That's probably a good idea to have. Maybe you might have just a CSS that does that. It clears out all the styles, and we just basically use the add import to bring that in. Remove padding and margins. Browsers that have add top and bottom margins to most block level elements. Don't add any more to that. Apply constant font sizes. While the text inside a P tag is displayed as 1em, web browsers apply different sizes to other tags. So you can force all tags to be 1em and then create additional styles for specific font sizes that you need. Set a consistent line height. Oh God, this is a great one to follow. Set a line height that basically is uniform. Because I've seen it where you've got, it almost looks like a ransom note sometimes, all the different spacing between lines. You can set that up in your CSS. Set up a consistent styling. Improve the table borders and create consistent table cells. Okay, so so it says applying a border to a table cell usually creates an unpleasant gap. So again, we saw that I forget this. Don't know off the top of my head, but there's a way to make sure that all of the cells come together as one border. Utilize that. Remove borders from linked images. Set consistent list indents and bullet types. Okay, make sure your bullet types and your numbering are all the same. You know, we don't have dots, we don't have triangles, we don't have other things. Make sure that they always have the same. Remove quote marks from quoted material. Okay, if you've ever used a Q tag that didn't find a quote to error is human, and you may have noticed that some browsers, Firefox and Safari, automatically add quote marks around quoted, and some externals don't. And even within browsers that add quote marks, the type of quote marks added varies. We might have a single pick, and then the closing pick, the closing double picks, so on and so forth. To put these ideas in action, here are some few basic styles that we can add to the beginning of our style sheets. Again, you could create a style sheet just for this and just import it into every one of your CSSs. Box sizing, so again, these are all of the items that I think were in some of those first CSSs that we used, like in Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. Again, a great place. I call it a good starting point. It lets us basically all start at ground zero, and then we create our CSSs from there. The first style changes how browsers and CSS. Okay, so basically what they're talking about is resetting some of the first changes up in here. Next two styles. Okay, anyway, it kind of goes into detail of what this style sheet is doing. Classes and IDs are great for making stuff specific tags for styling. However, you can add a class to a paragraph and pinpoint just that one paragraph with its own look. Okay, so let's say we've got a CSS applied to a paragraph. Well, I got this one paragraph, I want it to stand out, so I'm going to use the inline class for that P tag. So this one paragraph tag is going to have a different class style than what was applied to it in our CSS. Great way. So maybe we have an H1 tag that we've set up in our CSS, and going along, I've got this one H1 tag I want to be different. We can actually do inline styling. I could have style equals in this class as well. Just put the styling right inside of there. Web browser. So here's a power user clinic. The pain in the cache. The web browser's cache is usually every website owner's friend, as discussed in the internal style sheets. The cache makes sure that frequent visitors to your site don't have to download the same file over and over again, which would slow down the experience and increase your web hosting bills. However, the cache can be a pain when it's time to update your site's appearance. For example, if all the pages in your site reference an external style sheet in a main CSS, then visitors to your site will cache that file. However, when you update that file with all new styles and completely new look and feel, previous visitors to your site may continue to access the old style sheet from their hard drive instead of the new main CSS. Eventually the visitor's cache will clear and they will get the new CSS file, but you have one simple way to defeat the cache by updating the link tag on each HTML page. Normally a link tag to an external style sheet looks like this. Okay. However, if you add a query string after the name of the CSS, for example, add a question mark v equals 1, then a web browser will see the file as main.css question mark v equals 1 and not just main. If you change the number after the v whenever you change external style sheet, then the browser considers that a new file and downloads external style sheet. So here I've got this link main.css question mark v equals 1. It forces the browser of whoever's looking at that to then import the new style sheet. The next time it opens up, it will see the v1 and it basically says I've already got that, I've already got it cached, it's fine. But if I update it in the future and I put question mark v equals 2, it forces so the browser goes, I have v equals 1 cached, oh, there's v equals 2, I will pull down the new one. So what that allows us to do is to keep the same main.css, but forces the browser to get a new version of that whenever that number changes. So this is also a great idea, a great styling for your page. That's called a descendant selector. Compartmentalize your pages. One of your biggest allies is using descendant selectors effectively is the div tag, since the HTML tag lets you create logical divisions in a page. Okay, so group the title of a story and links like this. Just do div. After adding the div, identify CSS for purposes of class attribute. So what it does, it kind of breaks it out so that basically the CSS, it doesn't do anything, the div tag doesn't do anything, but it basically says, oh, these are together as one section. If I ever need to update that, I can add a class to it, or an ID, well, a class. I think we have to use a class if I use a div tag for multiple items. Once you've identified each div on a page, it becomes very easy to use descendant selector to target tags within a particular div. Say you want to create a unique look for each of the links in the above HTML. We'd have so here we have the story nav class. Here's the story nav class A, so all anchor tags inside the story nav class are going to have this particular style. Identify the body. Because descendant selectors provide such specific targeting of styles, you can easily create styles that not only apply to one particular area of the page, but also to one particular type of page in your site. Say you want to style the H1 tag differently on the home page than the other pages. So I can actually say that I want my body class, my body is going to be within the class home. So this particular site, just this page, I've identified it as a class home. So now I can then have a style, H1 style, for the home class. Okay, so any H1 tag inside of the home class will have this particular style. That's how we can keep the H1 tags different on each page. Add a class to the body tag, for example, class equals home. Do the same thing for each section, so pages in this news. So we can have each, we can be specific for all of our pages. We can have one style sheet and have styles in there specific for each page. We could say anything that has a home link inside of home, or news link inside of news, articles inside news articles, or article links inside of articles. Those are all going to have the same particular style as well. When creating a group selector that selects a several descendant selectors, keep each other in its own line. For example, this way it's easier to identify each selector in a group. Okay, so what they're saying is, I could have made this one big long line, but I've put these on one line, these on another, these on another, these on another. Okay, notice they're separated by comma, so they are treated as 4 separate items. And again, we're talking about home link inside of the home class, a news link class inside of the news class, so on and so forth. So grouping is a great way to go as well. Object-oriented CSS is another approach to organizing your CSS. This term was coined by a CSS expert, Nicole Sullivan, and the approach was developed to respond to the complexity of very large sites with a wide variety of HTML structures. On large sites, you might end up with having really different HTML container with similar types of information. For example, in one case you might use a bulleted list to display names, contact information, and photos for a list of contacts. But on another page you might use an article tag for each contact. Say you wanted to format each one of those separately. Because they really have the same type of information, you could use a CSS style that depends on the HTML. So you could come up with something like this. Any image inside of the article, any image inside of the line item will basically have this type of formatting. So object-oriented CSS recommends abandoning any CSS that's tied to actual HTML elements. Instead of use classes. So here's what we're saying. Don't use H1, don't have H1 and have a style just for H1. Create a class for an H1 tag. So you'd have H1 and then a class. So in that class inside of the H1 is always going to have that style. In this way, it doesn't matter what HTML tags you use, as long as they use the same classes, they'll look the same. So let's take that a step further. Instead of saying H1 in the class, just basically have a class. Develop a class for that style you want and just use it within the H1 tag. That way there we're not tied to an H1 tag, we're not tied to a P tag, we're not tied to anything. We basically use the class we want. This may sound like a lot of class problem described on using class. In a sense it is. Object-oriented CSS does require adding lots of classes to your HTML, your style sheet. Okay. So here's what I want you to do for your homework this week. I want you to go through and clean up your CSS. I want you to put comments in the CSS to me, what you're doing, how you're cleaning them up, and how you're basically put categories together, all that sort of thing. If you maybe want to break them out into separate CSSs and then use your import, that's fine as well. So let's go ahead and clean up your CSS, get it so it looks good, put comments in there to me, what you're doing, and then I will basically take a look at them. And we'll see you next week.